Here's what NATO's Secretary General just told European lawmakers that should terrify anyone paying attention. Mark Rutte stood in Brussels and said if anyone thinks Europe can defend itself without the United States, keep on dreaming. You can't. Those aren't my words. That's the head of NATO admitting that the world's largest military alliance cannot function without American backing. And this comes at the exact moment Donald Trump is demanding European allies spend 5% of their GDP on defense by 2035. Not 2%, 5%. That's a 150% increase from what most European countries spend today. But here's the twist. Europe is finally spending money. Massive money. The European Union just announced an $860 billion defense plan through 2029. Sounds impressive, right? Except there's a catch. The plan deliberately excludes American defense contractors from most opportunities. Germany's procurement list shows 154 major purchases planned through 2026, with only 8% going to U.S. suppliers. That's a dramatic shift from recent years when Berlin was one of Washington's biggest defense buyers. So Europe is spending, but buying European. And Rutte is saying that won't be enough. Ever. Picture this. It's January the 27th, 2026. Brussels. Mark Rutte, NATO's Secretary General, addresses European Parliament lawmakers. He's Dutch, pragmatic, known for blunt talk, and he just delivered the most sobering assessment of European defense capabilities in decades. If you really want to go it alone, Rutte said, forget that you can ever get there with 5%. It will be 10%. You have to build up your own nuclear capability. That costs billions and billions of euros. 10% of GDP. To put that in perspective, the United States spends 3.38%. Poland, the highest spender in Europe, hits about 4%. 10% would require European countries to redirect massive portions of their economies toward military spending. Healthcare cuts, education cuts, infrastructure delayed. And that's just to match what America currently provides, without even discussing the nuclear umbrella. Because right now, America's nuclear arsenal protects Europe. France and Britain have their own nukes, but their arsenals are tiny compared to the U.S. stockpile. If Europe goes fully independent, they need credible nuclear deterrence. That means France and Britain massively expanding their arsenals, or Germany going nuclear, which would violate every post-World War II norm and terrify Russia even more. James Newman here. If you want the unfiltered breakdown of whether Europe can actually defend itself without the United States, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this isn't just about NATO budgets or military hardware. This is about whether the security architecture that's kept Europe peaceful for 80 years is about to collapse, and what that means for America, for global stability, for your future. Subscribe because the decisions being made in Brussels, Berlin, and Washington right now will shape the next 50 years of geopolitics. Let me tell you what this is really about. Because the headlines focus on spending percentages and procurement contracts. 5% versus 2%. American weapons versus European weapons. But that misses the fundamental question. Can Europe actually build the military capacity to deter Russia without the United States? Not in theory. In practice. With the industrial base they have, the political unity they lack, and the time constraints they face. The answer, according to NATO's own leader, is no. At least not at any cost Europe is willing to pay. This is about the end of an era. Since 1949, NATO has operated on a simple assumption. America provides the backbone, the strategic airlift, the naval dominance, the nuclear umbrella, the intelligence infrastructure, and Europeans contribute what they can. That model worked for 75 years, but Donald Trump doesn't believe in that model. He thinks Europe has been freeloading, and he's forcing a reckoning. Now, if you don't understand how we got here, you need to know what NATO's spending guidelines actually mean. In 2014, after Russia annexed Crimea, NATO members agreed to spend at least 2% of GDP on defense. At the time, only 3 countries met that target: the US, Greece, and the UK. Most European allies were spending between 1 and 1.5%. Germany was at 1.2%. The assumption was that the post-Cold War peace dividend was permanent. Russia wasn't a threat. Europe could focus on social spending. America would handle security. But Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 shattered that illusion. Suddenly, European capitals realized they'd neglected their militaries for decades, so they started increasing budgets. By 2025, all NATO allies are expected to meet or exceed the 2% target. European allies and Canada collectively went from 1.43% of GDP in 2014 to 2.02% in 2024. That's real progress, but it's still nowhere near what's needed for actual self-sufficiency. Then came Trump's second term. In July 2025, at NATO's summit in The Hague, European allies agreed to Trump's demand. 5% of GDP by 2035. That's 3.5% for core defense plus 1.5% for security-related infrastructure. Roads, bridges, ports that can handle military logistics. The agreement was stunning, because it meant European leaders acknowledged the 2% target was never enough. They need far more just to maintain current security levels, and even that assumes continued American participation. Rutte's point in Brussels was that 5% gets you European defense with America still involved. If you want European defense without America, that's 10%, because you'd need to replace everything the U.S. currently provides. And what does America provide? Start with nuclear deterrence. The U.S. has about 3,700 nuclear warheads. France has 290. The U.K. has 225. If Europe goes independent, France and Britain would need to expand dramatically. Estimates suggest building a credible European nuclear deterrent would cost upwards of 500 billion euros. Just the initial build-out. Then there's conventional forces. The U.S. contributes 70% of NATO's defense spending. That funds massive capabilities Europe doesn't have. Strategic airlift. America can move entire divisions across the Atlantic in days. Europe can't do that for forces within Europe. Naval power. The U.S. Navy is larger than the next 13 navies combined. Europe has capable navies, but nothing approaching American scale. Intelligence. The U.S. intelligence apparatus dwarfs anything European. Surveillance satellites, signals intelligence, human intelligence networks, cyber capabilities. Europe benefits from all of it. Replacing that infrastructure would take decades and trillions. So Europe's trying a different approach. Don't replace American capabilities. Build enough European capability to hold the line until America decides to show up. Or, alternatively, build enough to deter Russia independently. That's where the €860 billion Rearm Europe plan comes in. Announced in March 2025 by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, the plan aims to leverage €800 billion in defense spending through 2029. €150 billion in EU-backed loans through a new instrument called SAFE, Security Action for Europe, plus measures to encourage national defense spending using the Stability and Growth Pact's National Escape Clause. 16 member states have requested activation. The idea is to allow countries to exceed normal budget deficit limits specifically for defense spending. But here's the controversial part. The plan prioritizes European manufacturers. By 2030, 55% of all weapons purchases must come from European or Ukrainian manufacturers. That's a deliberate choice to freeze out American contractors. Why? Several reasons. First, strategic autonomy. European leaders want an independent defense industrial base. They don't want to be reliant on American supply chains that could be cut off if Trump or a future president decides to withdraw support. Second, economic nationalism. If Europe's spending hundreds of billions on defense, European politicians want that money creating European jobs, not flowing to Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. Third, leverage. By building European alternatives, they gain negotiating power with the U.S. If America threatens to pull back, Europe can say, fine, we'll buy European. Germany's the clearest example. Berlin's new military procurement plan shows 154 major defense purchases through 2026. Only 8% are going to U.S. suppliers. That's a massive drop. Just a few years ago, Germany was buying American F-35 fighters, Apache helicopters, Chinook transport helicopters. Now they're pivoting. More Eurofighter Typhoons built by a European consortium, more Leopard tanks built in Germany. The shift is deliberate and strategic, and it's making American defense contractors nervous, because European defense spending is finally rising, but they're locked out of the market. France went further. They declined to participate in a NATO initiative where allies funnel roughly $1 billion per month to buy American weapons for Ukraine. Paris said no thanks. We'll provide our own weapons. This is about more than just Ukraine aid. It's about the fundamental question of whether European and American defense industries will cooperate or compete. And the problem with competition is inefficiency. Here's a shocking statistic. Europe has 178 different defense systems. The United States has 30. According to the Draghi report, there are 12 European types of battle tanks. The U.S. has one, the Abrams. This fragmentation is wildly expensive. Each system needs its own supply chain, its own training program, its own maintenance infrastructure. The Munich Security Report 2017 noted this fragmentation costs European taxpayers hundreds of billions in lost economies of scale. The U.S. achieves massive cost savings by producing thousands of the same platform. Europe produces dozens of competing platforms, each more expensive per unit. So when European leaders talk about building strategic autonomy, defense analysts cringe, because they're not consolidating. They're adding more fragmentation. Let's talk about what Rutte actually said in more detail, because his speech was a direct rebuke to the fantasy of European independence. We are going to need a lot more than 2%, he told lawmakers. The United States advocates an increased spending target to 5% of GDP. There are ongoing talks suggesting a potential compromise at around 3 to 3.5%. But Rutte made clear that's a compromise with America still in NATO. If you really want to go it alone, forget that you can ever get there with 5%. It will be 10%. You have to build up your own nuclear capability. That costs billions and billions of euros. And he added, without the United States, Europe would lose the ultimate guarantor of our freedom. That's the NATO Secretary General, appointed by European governments, admitting that European freedom depends on American protection. Why is Rutte so pessimistic? Because he's looked at the numbers. The International Institute for Strategic Studies published a report in 2025 titled Defending Europe Without the United States: Costs and Consequences. The conclusion was that directly replacing key parts of the U.S. contribution would amount to approximately $1 trillion. And that's just direct replacement. It doesn't account for the time needed to build that capability, or whether Europe has the political will to sustain that spending. Rutte's view is that Europe and the United States need each other. Europe can't go it alone. America benefits from European partners. The alliance is mutually beneficial. Dissolving it would be catastrophic for both sides. But Trump doesn't see it that way. Trump views alliances as transactional. What does America get in return for defending Europe? In his view, not enough. So he's demanding Europeans pay more, and threatening that if they don't, America might not show up next time. This creates an impossible situation. If Europeans believe Trump might abandon them, they have to prepare for independence, which means building European capabilities, which means buying European weapons, which angers American defense contractors and Trump himself, who wants Europeans buying American. But if Europeans buy American, while Trump threatens abandonment, they're building dependency on an unreliable partner. France has led calls for Europe to build its strategic autonomy. President Macron has been saying this for years. We cannot rely on America. We need European sovereignty. and support for Macron's stance has grown significantly since Trump's return to office. Because Trump's rhetoric about annexing Greenland, imposing tariffs on European allies, and treating NATO as a protection racket has convinced many European leaders that America is no longer a reliable partner. The Greenland situation is particularly telling. Trump threatened Denmark, a NATO ally, over Greenland. He talked about taking it by force if necessary. Then he imposed tariffs. Then he backed off after a framework for a deal was reached, with Rutte's mediation. Few details of the agreement have emerged, but the whole episode sent a clear signal. Trump will bully even close allies to get what he wants. So what happens next? 3 scenarios. Best case, Europe and America reach a new compact. Europeans agree to spend significantly more, maybe 3.5% by 2030, 5% by 2035. In return, America commits to NATO's Article 5 Mutual Defense Guarantee explicitly and credibly. Trump gets what he wants, higher European spending. Europe gets what it needs, American security commitment. The alliance survives. Procurement opens up. American and European defense industries cooperate rather than compete. Economies of scale reduce costs. NATO becomes stronger than before, and this is possible but requires political will on both sides. Middle case? Europe and America muddle through. Europeans slowly increase spending toward 3%. America stays in NATO but with constant griping from Washington. The relationship remains strained. European strategic autonomy efforts continue. More European procurement, less American. The Atlantic Alliance weakens but doesn't break. In a crisis, Article 5 probably holds. But there's doubt, and that doubt undermines deterrence. Russia tests NATO's resolve with hybrid warfare, cyber attacks, disinformation, energy blackmail, probing for weaknesses. NATO responds but slowly, hampered by internal divisions. Europe spends more but inefficiently, with continued fragmentation. The defense industrial base remains split between American and European systems. Costs stay high. Capability gaps persist. Worst case, America pulls out of NATO, either explicitly or effectively. Trump or a future president says Europe's on its own. Article 5 is dead. The security guarantee is gone. European countries panic. Defense spending spikes toward 10% in frontline states like Poland and the Baltics. But Southern Europe can't afford it. NATO fragments. Poland, the UK, and the Baltics form a tight partnership with continued American bilateral support. Western Europe tries to build its own defense structure but struggles with cost and political disagreements. Russia sees opportunity, not a full-scale invasion but aggressive moves to test the new European order, seizing more Ukrainian territory, cyber attacks on Baltic states, energy coercion against Germany. Europe responds but weakly. No unified command. No American backstop. The crisis escalates. War becomes possible. Watch for specific indicators. Does the U.S. Senate ratify any new NATO expansion? Sweden and Finland joined recently. If the Senate balks at future expansion, that signals American commitment is wavering. Does Trump visit European capitals or skip Europe entirely? Diplomatic engagement matters. If Trump treats European leaders as adversaries rather than allies, that's a bad sign. Do European defense budgets actually increase? Promises are easy. Execution is hard. If European countries hit 3% by 2027, that shows serious intent. If they stall at 2.2%, promises were empty. And, most critically, how does NATO respond to the next Russian provocation? If there's swift, unified action, the alliance works. If there's hesitation and finger-pointing, it's broken. This affects more than just Europe and America. The entire global security architecture depends on NATO. American alliances in Asia, Japan, South Korea, Australia. Watch what happens in Europe closely. If America abandons NATO, why would they trust American security guarantees? The message to Beijing would be clear. America doesn't honor its commitments. Taiwan is vulnerable. The South China Sea is China's. If American credibility collapses in Europe, it collapses globally. Autocracies learn that democracies can't sustain long-term commitments. Borders can be redrawn by force. The post-World War II order ends. And here's the fundamental contradiction. Europe probably cannot defend itself from Russia without America. Not at any cost Europeans are politically willing to pay. 10% of GDP for defense means gutting social programs that define the European model: universal health care, free university, generous pensions. Those would have to be cut drastically. European voters would revolt. Governments would fall. So European leaders talk about strategic autonomy but can't actually deliver it. They're trapped, dependent on an America that's increasingly unreliable, building European capabilities that are fragmented and expensive, and hoping the whole house of cards doesn't collapse. NATO has survived for 75 years because it served mutual interests. America gained forward defense in Europe and reliable allies. Europe gained security and prosperity. But Trump views that arrangement as a bad deal for America. He wants Europe to pay more and buy American. Europe wants to pay some, but buy European. And neither side seems willing to compromise. Rutte's warning is that without compromise, the alliance fails. And if the alliance fails, Europe is in serious danger. Not tomorrow, not next year, but within a decade, as Russian military capabilities rebuild and European resolve weakens. If this breakdown helped you understand whether Europe can actually defend itself without America, hit that like button and subscribe, because NATO's July 2026 summit will be critical. That's when European leaders present their plans for reaching 5% by 2035. And that's when we'll see if this alliance survives, or if we're watching the slow-motion collapse of the security order that's kept the peace for 3 generations. Tell me in the comments, can Europe go it alone? Or is Rutte right that it's impossible? I'll see you in the next one.